Welcome back, and this is part 2 of the podcast that we recorded from the event in Edinburgh, Owning Our Futures, which was a whole gathering of groups from all around Europe seeking greater autonomy for their region or nation. If you haven't watched the first one, have a look at that. It'll give you an introduction to all of those groups.
And Greg McCara, who is the convener of the Scottish Independence Convention, did actually list everybody. So let's just hear from Greg.
Greenland, the Faroes, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Flanders, the Veneto, Sardinia, Sicily, South Tyrol, Catalonia, the Basque Country, Corsica, and the north of England.
So there you go, party game. Find them all on a map.
And what's going to happen in this part 2 is people on the panels took questions.
I'm just so impressed with how 14 different nations were represented, how many of them were at this conference speaking not in their native language, and their English is brilliant. And not only did they do a prepared speech, which you saw in the first program, but this is actually answering questions. So I'm just full of admiration for the way they managed to do that. We didn't manage to cover all of them in the first episode, so you'll see a few additional countries represented here and some new faces. So shall we start off with the first panel? And this was actually chaired by Lesley Riddoch, who was just popping up everywhere that month, chairing all sorts of things. She chairs it really well. The way she handled the questions was to ask a group of questions and then give them to the panel, and they could pick which ones they wanted to answer. So that's where we'll pick it up.
Has the EU, being in the EU, helped you? The second was, have you plans for what currency you would use as independent countries? The second one is disobedience. What do you think? And the fourth one is there a class basis to your movement?
Well, not being an expert, European Parliament won't help, per se. First, you've got to believe in yourself and declare your independence. Then, maybe, but it's a club that defends themselves. So we cannot expect much. Of course, it's another place where we have to fight as well. Currency, far from that, myself. I think first is independence, then we'll think what the options are. Maybe EFTA, maybe Euro, I don't know. I'm far from that. I'm not an economist. Disobedience, yes. I think it's the only way, really. And based on class movement, they always tend to say that it's based on bourgeoisie. I don't think it is the case in the Basque Country. I think it's across a lot of classes, social classes, maybe not the high class because they tend to support the Spanish interests or the French interests, but I think it's across the social network.
What kind of disobedience are you either planning or doing?
Disobedience that is not violent, but try to think in other ways to alter the status quo, like declaring independence in the municipalities, so working on that, like they've been arrested now, crossing, having an event for the language, for example, a race for the language, and crossing the border between the southern Basque Country, supposedly in Spain, and the northern Basque Country in France, and crossing with migrants, for example, that are camouflaged with us, among us. So things like that can make people think of different issues. So I won't reveal here, but it's disobedience based on non-violent means.
So I'm coming back to the question of a European Parliament, because for Sardinia it's kind of the symbolic question, because we are in the section, in the electoral section with Sicily, and now I have to go against you, but we have no representative members in the European Parliament, because we are in the same sections. We have 1,005,000 inhabitants against 5 million inhabitants of Sicily. So we don't have any member representing Sardinia. This is a problem. I don't know how we can change it, but we have to change. And I hope that our future can be better and can be changed by the European Union.
First of all, the European Union. Okay, for me, I think it's very important that we differentiate what is Europe that what is the European Union, because there are different realities, different history, different meanings. Secondly, I don't think European Union sometimes has been like, I go to the European Union, like if it's a door that says European Union and that's it, that is it. No, it's very complex and it's huge. And the European Union, you have the European Parliament, where it looks like it's very democratic because we have the people that we have voted through the political parties, but there's other institutions that they don't seem that democratic because we don't choose who are the members, who are the ones running the show there. But at the same time, I don't think that, I think like in every other aspects of these institutions, you do have people supporting your cause, and you have people they don't, but normally they're not that free either because they are from political parties. So it depends on the moment when your ideology is governing more than the other. So basically, it's fine, they're there. It's politically wise to know which doors to choose, which doors to talk to. But again, sovereignty is on us. And we need to know which are our rights, and that's it, and go to exercise them. On the respect of the disobedience, well, disobedience has an issue, well, it has many issues, but it has one in the concept, that is that you are disobedient to somebody, there's somebody that is authority, which you are not. So I don't really like this setting from the beginning. Because we're already saying that there's somebody that is the authority that you disobey. So I prefer to say that actually we are obedient to ourselves. We are obedient to our democratic mandates. We are obedient to our parliament, who are the ones that should set our laws and our debates. Let's be obedient to ourselves, to democracy, to our values, to self-determination. And if that means we're going to be in conflict to that authority that is not that democratic because it doesn't share our values, then let's be it. We'll see which are going to be the ways we obey ourselves, we obey democracy, and that would mean to disobey them. But I don't like the situation which I am like the one disobeying somebody that is ruling. We are the ones ruling ourselves, and that's how I think we should be looking at it and maybe start changing it. About the currency, yeah, I think that there are different options, but actually I think sometimes we should keep for ourselves some cards and let's see how we negotiate things. We'll see what will be our interest. We'll see how we're going to play it along, and maybe it's good to stay with the euro, maybe it's not, maybe who knows. Let's walk. And while we're walking, maybe sometimes there's a new corner, there's a new, and we have to play the cards like that.
Loved that point that she made about disobedience. The concept of disobedience is accepting there's somebody with, superiority to you that you're railing against. That's a very interesting point.
Yeah, it is actually, and that was my question, the one about the European Union and where did they have any dialogue with them? And it didn't quite show in the clip, but when I said it, I mean there was a sort of immediate kind of a bit of eye rolling that went on with the panel, and kind of fair enough. But ISEC itself as an organisation is affiliated into, it's, how would you put it, maybe affiliated isn't the right way, but it has got connections and links in to the European Parliament. And when I was on their website just actually this morning, and they've got a photograph of a delegation from ISEC actually in the Parliament with their own kind of logos and banners. So they were obviously there taking part in some sort of event. So that in itself is just a benefit, isn't it? And it's something that we don't have. Well, I suppose we have it in as much as some Scottish groups are part of ISEC, but we don't kind of feel like the Yes movement or the Scottish independence movement quite has much of our inroads into Brussels.
I hadn't thought of it that way until you say it right now, because I was thinking, they're a bit there's certain criticisms they make of the institutions, which is, perfectly fine from their perspective. But you're right. They at least can be in there making criticisms and choosing which door to go through. I think we can't because we're outside it. So there's almost, I wonder if perhaps they don't quite appreciate what they've got. because they've still got it. As with us, there's bits about the EU setup that we don't like. There's things that we would want to change. It's by no means a perfect organisation, but being on the inside is still preferable, I think, to being on the outside where we are. So, yeah, good point.
So what's next then?
What's next is the second panel. And again, we won't have everybody answering every question because they didn't do that on the day. There's a couple of voices, I think, that you maybe didn't hear in the first programme on this one, or one at least anyway.
Got one question which is asking about your attitudes towards the far right in your country, in your movement. Another which is asking how you manage the media and social media. Is it so stacked against you as it feels like it is here? A third one, the difference between federalism and independence. What you think you would, because some of you are in federal arrangements. And the final one is, we're all feeling a bit down 10 years after the independence referendum in Scotland. From your perspective, what do you see when you see, what's happening in Scotland, and what do you think we still have going for us? And I'm just going to chuck a third one in of my own, which is what you get for standing here beside the microphone, which was, it strikes me of all the speakers we've had so far, all of your independence campaigns are very centred around your language, and we aren't. What do you think about that? Because language doesn't play such a big role here, since we speak the same language as the rest of the country from which we wish to be separate.
In Flanders, basically for, let's say, around 80 years, we have a strong right-wing part to our movement that first tried for federalization. And it has always been a part of our movement that even though there have been traumatic experience in the past, of course, it has never truly faded away completely. At the moment, Belgium is a federal state, which means that there are 3 regions, Flanders, Wallonia, and the territory of Brussels, simply put, which are all equal, but they all have their own responsibilities, sometimes also partly shared. Now, just like many other countries, once in a while we are confronted with certain crisis situations. And then the principle of all the levels at the moment in the federation being equal comes under pressure. For many decades, basically since the founding of Belgium, the region of Flanders has always been voting in a different sense than the south, than Wallonia. They have different future perspectives. That's basically the core of our movement at the moment. Now, when it comes to elections in this federal state, to form a federal parliament, it isn't the case that Flemish people could vote for people living in Wallonia and vice versa. Every single federal elections, the democracy of Flanders and the democracy of Wallonia are put together. Dus in the sense, half of the parliament is filled with representatives from Flanders, the other half by representatives of Wallonia and Brussels. The thing is, because of these different views, there is never true stability on the federal level. It is by now very difficult to form federal governments. I think maybe some of you are aware that we have the World Championship a couple of years ago, about 500 days, I believe, without a federal government, because of the difficulty of uniting these two democracies. To come to the point, certainly for that first question, having difficulties forming a balanced government makes it impossible to have a clear answer to modern day problems that we are confronted with. And it means that as long as this system exists, certain problems that societies are faced with and that are often in the media will never stop being a baseline for parties, for example, from the far right. Now, it is true that the far right has always had a certain wing in our movement, but from the moment that there would be more independence from our region and there would be a more efficient government that could deal with difficulties in a more efficient way, that would take away the whole core of the reason of existing of this wing. Now, at the moment that isn't the case, and that is why they have grown again. We have had our recent elections in June. The more moderate Flemish regionalist party, that in the end also strives for independence, has gained, if I'm not mistaken, a bit more than 25% of the votes of the Flemish. The radical right has obtained about 23%, which means that 50% of the seats is in our hands. And now it is my firm belief, but it could be a mentality maybe just only for Flanders or uniquely, but that we should use this momentum, the fact that half of the regional parliament is in our hands, that we should look for the positive sides of cooperation and to afterwards focus on those fields that need to be dealt with, but in, of course, a democratic way. Scotland, the impressions are, well, Flanders will always be sympathetic towards Scotland and its independence movement, as I've also stated. Maybe there should be more efforts made, and we all share a responsibility in that, to keep our contacts closer and to try and strive to, I mean, this conference is a great initiative, but I believe that more such efforts should be made throughout the year.
South Tyrol has a German and Ladin-speaking minority. This is the basic that South Tyroleans have an autonomy, nothing more, nothing less. And if we are coming to left and right in this kind of thing, we see it in South Tyrol that the progressive forces don't see that. They don't want a separation of the three different languages or the three different people groups in South Tyrol. They want a common living together. They want a multi-ethnical society in this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, this multi-ethnic society is killing the basis for the autonomy of South Tyrol, which is based on the German and Latin-speaking minority. So in this case of South Tyrol, it's a little bit a struggle to say, okay, where it's coming from. Also, if we see it in an Italian-wide perspective, in Italy, it doesn't depend if the party is left, the party is right. All parties at the end of the day are national parties. They don't care about South Tyrolean minority rights at all. So it is for us a special case maybe, but I'm glad if people from left, from right want to work together to seeking independent country, to seeking freedom together. I'm more than happy to welcome to it. The reality at the end of the day, it's not like it is. Also for media, yes, we try. We have established own patriotic media, which is more or less, in our favor. What is also giving out news which other news won't, share in this kind of manner.
Because of the young people who are leading the movement, I think social media is inevitable. Thank you. So much of my work is on social media, and it's such a gift in a way, because I also follow a lot of people in Canada and Alaska, and I also want to mention that my people have also been divided into 4 different colonial borders. So we are in Greenland, colonized by Denmark. The Inuit in Canada were colonized by Canada, and then we have Inuit in Alaska. And finally, also Inuit who live in Siberia and Russia. And it makes it really hard for us to actually be able to work together, because it's so divided, and we have also historically different experiences of colonization and things that we are up against. But I really, really imagine and hope for a union of Inuit in those territories. Very much inspired by the Samis, who are the only recognized indigenous peoples in Europe. They are divided in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia too. And they have such a strong voice because they work together, and I really hope that for our people as well. Our official language is Galatlisut, our indigenous language, and up to 70% only speak this language. And sometimes I feel like even though that's what many people are fighting for around the world, it can be a disadvantage, because many of the policies are only in Danish, so it leaves out a lot of people who are not able to fully understand what's happening. And recently, just 2 days ago, there was a big fuss in the Danish government. We have 2 elected members from Greenland in the Danish parliament, and one of them was fighting. Her name is Agi Matilda, and she was fighting for the possibility to speak our language in the Danish government, of course with the simultaneous translation. She was allowed to, but they didn't allow people to ask questions for her speech. So she was basically left out of the democracy making of the parliament, which was so painful to watch. But I think there is also another strength in having your own language, and that's social media has a really hard time understanding what we say, so they have a hard time banning us. And please don't tell people, but so in a way, in that sense, sometimes it can be a secret weapon too.
I'm happy that I come from a country where the extreme right is non-existent. There might be some persons, but no party. Of course, we have a right wing, and unfortunately, it looks like they're going to win the next election in 2 years' time. I hope not, but we do have right and left, and then we have unionists, and then we have independents, and then we have a religion going through all the parties. So it's complicated even in a small country. But I would like to answer a bit to this question about the arguments against independence and to keep like federal or Rijksfellesskap, which is the name of the coalition. Yeah, it's a kind of Commonwealth, but actually it's Denmark ruling Faroe Islands and Greenland when it comes to certain matters. And the arguments are often those: if you get independence, then you will isolate yourself. Right before the last election in Faroe Islands, the Danish Prime Minister came to the Faroe Islands and he intervened in our election to our parliament, and he went into the media. All the journalists were running after him and making interviews, and he said, "Oh yes, you want independence, you will get very isolated." And it's so provocative because, I mean, in my view, independence, actually, we are never going to be alone. We want to be in coalitions. We want even to be in a coalition with Denmark. But we want to be on equal footing. And we want the people of Faroe Islands to choose with whom we are together and in which organizations we are members. I mean, it's really a question about democracies. The Danes are so nice. I mean, I'm married to one myself. I like them. It's not a question about that. It's just a question about people don't understand. They don't see that they also are a power that are really stepping on both Greenland and Faroe Islands very often. And I know when I read my speech, and I think Lesley just wrote a book about fabulous Denmark, and it is a very nice country. But, I mean, you have to listen to when you have a totally other culture, other language, other people, and they always had their own history. You have to listen, what do you want? And they also say, you will get worse healthcare. No, today, Faroese taxpayers pay for our healthcare. When we send patients to Denmark, we pay even expensive to Denmark. They earn a lot of money because they are treating some of our patients. Of course, we need to have those cooperations. And then it's education. They say your young people will not get any education. Yes, all the Nordic countries have made an agreement that they can come to us and get education. We can go to them. I am educated both in Denmark and in Norway for free. That's how the Nordic countries cooperate. So that are the arguments against. And of course, we want to find a solution that is good for us, a very small country, which cannot have all the functions as bigger countries. But, well, I'm very glad for this convention because I think it's so important also to get the media to help us. I'm afraid that's very hard. I cannot tell a good story about to get the media to help us because I think they are too much run by the forces that are against independence at the moment, at least.
So much overlap, isn't there? I mean, even just what the Danish Prime Minister was saying, you know, in Faroes, oh, you'll be isolated. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we get all the time, isn't it?
Yeah. Turning up and interfering in their elections. Well, Starmer did that. He's up there all the time. And I loved that point, though, that Aka was making about, you know, the advantage of having a language that nobody... I thought we all need to get on Duolingo and start learning Gaelic. And then we can at least have a Gaelic social media.
Yes, I know. And I think that particular set of question and answer just just affected me quite a lot. And I'm kind of remembering now as I'm watching the clips, just because there is so much of that overlap. And I'm also sitting thinking, I just want to be a Nordic country.
Yes, totally.
I just want to be in with them. It's a bit like, you're at school and you just really, really want to join that gang.
They can share our universities, of course.
Yes, of course. Faroes, it might be faster to get down to, a hospital in Glasgow than it might be to have to go all the way to Copenhagen. Let's do it.
The wisdom and the perspective that comes from people, in Europe, in all these different countries, different situations, and so much that we've got in common. It really is fascinating. He wasn't one of the clips we picked for the first episode, but the second speaker there was from South Tyrol, which is quite an interesting thing. It's German speakers who were taken over. The territory was taken over by Italy after the Second World War. There's obviously quite a history there, which we don't really know the ins and outs of what was going on there. But his perspective was slightly different, wasn't it? He was almost saying, the progressive parties are the ones that want everybody to be joined up, and they wanted to keep their own distance. It just seemed to be a slightly different perspective. But
I was struck because I was sort of thinking when he was speaking, I think he was saying like when you think about representation of that part of Italy, South Tyrol, but part of Italy, what representation do they have, in Rome in the Italian federal government, and then what do they have in Europe? And it just struck me there was a bit of a similarity there with the chap from Sardinia who was saying, well, they're in the region with Sicily, which sort of makes sense, but the way that it's set up, all the MEPs have come from Sicily. Now that may not be a deliberate kind of thing. It might just be it just comes out of the voting system and the numbers and everything and who voted for whom. But there's obviously kind of room for improvement even on that level, isn't there?
Yeah. And the other thing it makes me think of is that, rolling forward to the glorious day when we are in independent Scotland, we're going to have to not make these mistakes with Scotland, like Shetland and, other bits that might see a distinctiveness about themselves and want to be represented. I mean, we already get criticism that it's a central belt government. Well, Scotland's a much bigger place and we all need to be able to contribute. So
yeah, indeed. And I mean, fair enough, because most of the population is in the central belt, but just to that's not enough of an answer. That's just a fact, but it isn't taking into account people's needs, but also feelings and emotions. So we do need to sort it out. And culture.
And distinct history, and there's space for all these things. But
I was just going to say, because when we were in the European Union, Scotland had 6 MEPs. But if we were part and parcel of the European Union as an independent country, that would be up at about 12. And if that applies to Scotland, that would also apply to these smaller places.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was just such a good clip. I mean, they're great. They're really great, aren't you? And as you say, none of them are speaking their own language.
I know. Imagine us trying to turn up on a panel and get by in Faroese or something. I mean, so the third panel, again, very interesting mix of speakers.
Can there be independence without an independent currency? Should we be taking, those of us who ain't over the line yet, should we be taking advantage of the enlargement process that's happening in the EU at the moment? And would Big Brother Ireland help us? Yep, civic society being more... People are maybe going to... I'm trying to find ways to phrase this so that there isn't just agreement. But anyway, civic society being more important than politicians. The question from the back, which was, how did the Welsh do the National Energy Company? Or did they not in the end? And we've also got... the international law questions. Is it the salvation? Is there a route in there? Or is it a bit of a kind of, googly? And a question as well about whether the movement and national cultural identity needs to be aware of colonisation.
So I'll quickly do the Welsh energy question. Broadly speaking, no, although there's a sort of pretend shadow of an energy company that's been sponsored by Welsh government. The truth is that Wales is constantly being shafted when it comes to energy policy and the exploitation and extraction of energy resources from Wales. I'm not going to go into the detail, but it's extensive and it's constant, and it will carry on until as much juice has been squeezed out of the Welsh orange as possible by the Treasury, and then they will probably throw some crumbs to the devolved government of Wales, because that's how they function and work, as we all know. Just a quick answer to the two legal questions. Look, government is by the will of the people. That is the way it works. If 60 or 65% of the people say, we do not want to be governed this way, the law will be changed to accommodate the will of the people. Because the only way you can prevent that is through violence, and I don't think that is acceptable anymore in the modern world in which we live. So if Scotland, or if Wales, have 60% of the population saying, look, we're done, we're leaving, then they have to find a way to let you leave. Because you cannot govern without the will of the people. We have to remember this. I mean, we can play around with international law as much as we want, but what you have to do is convince your nation that you want a different arrangement. There's a similar point to be made about a voice in Europe for stateless nations. It's not really in the European Union's interest to give a voice to stateless nations, which are constituent parts of the nations which make up the European Union or of Europe, because you're just going to create conflict within the institution of the European Union, which has plenty of stresses and strains inside it already. So first you have to win the argument within your state or region, and then once that is won, you can start to talk to Europe about joining Europe or not, or whatever relationship you want to have. It's a slightly different question about whether there are ways to persuade the European to be supportive of cultural movements within a broader European context, and that could possibly be a backdoor into influencing that European project and creating more influence and identity for states and regions. So there is a slightly nuanced approach to it, but if you go to the European Union and say, give us a voice, they're just going to say no. I am a huge fan of civic nationalism, and I would like to see an awful lot more emphasis on it within what has become quite a sickened political institution. So if you just look at the UK and declining political participation, if you look at Wales, it's even worse. I think we had 44% for the last Senedd election. That's fewer than half of the population engaging. And you have to remember that hundreds of thousands aren't even registering, so it's even fewer. So yes, I think we should be doing more, and our politicians and leaders should be doing an awful lot more to engage with the public that they don't bother to engage with. So they only talk to existing voters because they think it's hard work to talk to those who aren't engaged. But that's very reductive, and if you keep making it reductive, eventually you open the door to protest groups like Reform in the UK, or other far-right groups and populists in other places. So currency. No nation that has become independent has had a problem settling on a currency eventually, ever. And why do you have to decide on a currency before you become independent? Honestly, you know, things will carry on. Day before independence, you're spending money in the shop. Day after independence, you're spending money in the same shop. And the same people are working in the same shop. As you go through the process, then you can develop different currencies, or you can choose a different currency to work with. But it's not a fundamental issue when it comes to the independence of your nation or the autonomy of a region. And it has been made an issue, particularly in Scotland, by the national press in the UK, and you know, there was quite a dramatic moment in 2014 that was all around currency. But it's a non-issue.
Yes, there could have been a Scottish energy company with some significant powers, not obviously not having the powers of full independence and full control, but a plan for this. If you go and look at the Commonweal material, they had a detailed plan for a Scottish energy company. And if you look at their How to Start a New Country book, or Sorted, or you just identify particularly Scottish energy company, you'll see the details of how that could have been done. The question, why did the Scottish government at that time not do it? Despite the fact it was SNP policy, that puts a question mark over what advice they're getting, who makes the policy, who's got the nerve, how much lobbying being done by vested interests. So, but yes, there could have been a significant initiative there that was started. On the question of the civic campaigns and the political, the answer is you've got to do both. Ultimately, it is the political power structures which will fulfill the legislative requirements to transfer into an independent state. And you've got to recognise that. But it's the question of what makes the political power structures move. And one of the most important things is if there are all these public pressures and active and creative civic pressures moving them. Now that's what we did to produce the Scottish Parliament. Because we not only, had the normal kind of campaigns, but what we did in setting up the Constitutional Convention, but we could only do that when we had the support of major civic organisations. But when we had that support and were able to set up that, we're able to show there was a genuine consensus to produce real plans and to get the damn MPs. I remember standing behind them in a signing ceremony, getting them to sign their support individually. As I said to some of them, we want your blood. And they had to sign up individually that they would support this. Now that is no guarantee, as we know, with elected politicians. But that amount of pressure building up resulted in that legislation for the Scottish Parliament being produced within months of that new Labour government being elected. When we look at the present Labour government and the total absence of anything remotely ambitious, and that's to start with, that can always only get worse. Now, the question on currency is vital. I'm sorry, I disagree. Vital Scotland has its own currency. It is different with some of the other countries currently who are in the euro. That's a different situation because you are already in a situation where there is a central bank on which you will be represented. That was not the case with Scotland and would not have been because, of course, what immediately George Osborne said is, well, you're not getting represented in a central bank. You will be using sterlingisation. You will not have access to the Bank of England. So you will have no central bank powers or functions. And that would have been, it just would not have worked for Scotland. And we now have really good plans with loads of work that's been put in on a Scottish currency.
We're at first base, really, and we can't answer any of these questions in the north of it, from Northumbria. The point about international law, I would just say, appeals to international law needs to be an environment where the country that we're currently part of, UK, isn't actively trashing international law and destroying the whole basis of it. So that's a real problem we've got to address. About the colonisation thing, I mean, England was the oppressor nation, was the coloniser. So there's a process to go through to come out of that and go into this millennium as something else. And, we need to talk to people and places that are going through that process and share with them. And I think there's other European countries that are like that. And I'm going to answer a question in the last session about bigging up Scotland. This is the last thing I'm going to say. We really got going because 10 years ago, so many amazing things were happening in Scotland. So many people were talking. There was such civic activity. And the contrast with the north of England was depressing and disgusting, really. And we wanted a piece of that action. And although I know you feel that you've come back a bit in the last 10 years, you're still miles and miles ahead of us, and we're very envious of you.
I view decolonisation as one of sort of a tripod of struggle, decolonisation on culture, politics and class. And I think politics and class tend to ebb and flow, but culture and language, that's the glue that keeps people together. And if you can keep that going constantly with decolonial thought and action, then you're on to a winner. And yes, I echo what was said there about not being despondent, Scotland, because if you think about the sort of forces that were pitted against you, the most sophisticated propaganda machine in the world, nearly the BBC, Murdoch's rags, and the resources, the infinite resources of the British state, MI5, MI6, they were all at play, I think, and to come within a whisker of it nearly achieving independence, I think it can be done again. Just maybe getting the house in order in certain aspects, looking from the inside out, but I'm not an expert, so I'll defer to you.
That's interesting. What do we need to do? What do you mean by
Well,
that?
it just looks like things are disjointed at the moment, looking from the outside in terms of coherence and controversies within political parties and so forth, and rifts. I think unity and momentum is required again.
Again, a couple of speakers at that one who didn't feature in our first show. You probably recognised Isobel Lindsay, who's often on our shows, and the other one was Representative Richard from Northumbria, or the north of England. The first one, the Welsh speaker, who was talking about if you're up at 60%, you govern by consent. Polls this weekend are showing us at 54% for yes, so that's pretty encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And also it was a polling company that still does the business of balancing it with respect to whether people were no voters or yes voters, which, was a completely fair enough statistical, fix to add in after, probably for a few years after 2014, but it really isn't justified now. So if there's 54% with that going on, you can bet it's higher.
Yeah, even if it's only 55, 56.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I'm thinking about kind of little wrangles one gets into sometimes on social media about, we need to do this, and what the SNP have done nothing, or when you should go to the UN. Maybe at some point we would go to the UN, but you don't go to the UN when your vote for yes is at 45%.
Yeah.
If you and I were in the Westminster government, why would we bother if it's still at 45%? It's when it gets to 54, 55. We're wonderful if it got up to 60 and stays in that sort of upper 50s, at least that kind of bracket. That's why he was saying that, because that means they don't have the consent of Scotland. And at that point, you would hope that there would be a shift. That's always what's said, isn't it? That, look, get it up to 55 or 60%. At that point, Westminster is going to have to change its tune. I do think that's correct, and if they don't, well, you and I will enjoy a bit of civil disobedience, won't we?
Absolutely, yes. Where's my Duolingo so we can plan it?
Yes, we can do it all. You can speak in Norwegian and I'll reply in Gaelic, which will be unintelligible not only to MI5 but also to us.
And we're not sponsored by Duolingo, we should make that clear.
No, we're not.
We have, for reasons of time, obviously cherry-picked things that we thought would be of most interest, but also things that perhaps were most easy to hear. Sometimes the acoustics work against you in these kind of events. But if you do want to watch the whole thing, the whole afternoon, it is on Independence Live. They live streamed the whole thing. And the other thing, just Isobel was talking about the Commonweal's work on the energy company. We actually covered that with Craig, one of our earlier Members Eye episodes. I'll put the link to that in the notes. We'll also link to the two organisations that have brought this together, which is the Scottish Independence Convention and ISEC, if that's how we're pronouncing it, the International Commission for European Citizens.
I had a look on their website this morning, and yes, sort of Scottish Independence Convention is part of it, but so is Business for Scotland, so is Commonweal, so is Women for Independence. So, there are a number of Scottish independence campaigning groups, part and parcel of it. I was just really pleased. I didn't know that. I kind of thought maybe it's only, the Scottish Independence Convention that were part of it, but it's not. There's more than the one. So have a look on their website.
Okay, and just to finish off, Lesley, as you said, had been chairing the event. It went on after the conference. There was a social gathering, which we unfortunately didn't stay for because we had to get our respective trains home. But they did have haggis and Scottish music and ceilidhs and stuff, so whiskey. I'm sure that our guests enjoyed that as well. So this is Lesley's very short closing remarks, and what's quite nice in it, she gave us a wave. She couldn't remember our name, but she gave us a wave.
We do know that, you know, obviously unity of purpose and kind of the dynamics that are created from all of us coming together are absolutely what we need to be able to keep going to find the next level. And it's been tremendous to hear these insights today. I mean, it does cause me to reflect that we are an independence movement that doesn't have the usual binding ingredients. We're not bound together by religion. We're not bound together by language. We're not bound together by anything except knowing that we are in a society, in a community, which could easily be a state as it was called Scotland. And I must say, when I was actually over speaking in a debate organised by BBC World before the Catalan debate, the independence declaration, and I was supporting the Catalan speaker, actually afterwards, one of the other side, the constitutional expert from Madrid, came up and said to us, he said, you know, you guys are quite special because to us you seriously are like civic nationalists. And I was waiting for a but, and it didn't come. Now, there's swings and roundabouts. If we were all bound together by a language, life would be a lot easier. It would be easier to denote, to distinguish who we are as opposed to who we are not. But we don't have that. So what we do have, actually, Scots, is the most incredibly inclusive approach to being a citizen of this country, perhaps in the world. You know, we're the people who decided that we would make anyone eligible to vote in the independence referendum who had lived here for 3 months. It meant Sean Connery didn't get the vote. If he didn't come back from Bahamas, no. And it's very different. You know, if you look at the Brexit referendum, it was ethnic. So there's something kind of strong about the way that we've created this, if you like, independence campaign, minus the usual things that help firm up an idea of identity. And yet perhaps we're paying too little attention, I think, to the cultural roots that we definitely have, because language really matters to us. It's just not a defined European language, but it's still Urein. And I'd like to thank also the live streamers from Independence Live and yourselves here who've been streaming this entire debate. And that's a tremendous strength here. The self-startingness of this movement never fails to amaze me. So thanks to everybody here, particularly to Bjort and Arque, who have come from the, essentially for us, far north, and are sitting here freezing. So for everyone who's come from every part, really, across Europe, and indeed from our own British Isles, as you might feel we have to call them. But anyway, these islands that we inhabit, would you please give them a huge round of applause?
I've really enjoyed watching those clips again, because it's a little while since the conference happened, so and I haven't heard them since, but I think there's just some really important food for thought that's come out of that.
Yeah, real wisdom as well, and people seeing it from outside often see things that we're missing ourselves. So yeah, very much enjoyed it, and hope everybody enjoyed watching that, and that we keep going. I mean, this is the important thing. We're on 54%. This is brilliant. Just carry on.
Yep. But also, I think mainly I just take away from that a sort of sense of, I don't know, comradeship.
Yes.
It's comradeship, because these people know what we're feeling to some extent, you know, and we also can understand and sympathise with what they're feeling. So that's great to have got that. And we'll see you again next week for the next podcast.
Okay, bye now.